So almost exactly a year ago, with the hype of Overdress's upcoming release, Different Fight released a video titled Potential New Archetype Designs for Overdress. Something around those lines. And the title is pretty much self-explanatory, but he went over, potential either new ride lines, new archetypes, new designs that he was hoping would be explored within the upcoming Overdress. Among other things, he mentioned something about Xenoblade Chronicles, and that's kind of always stuck with me to this day. What would it be like if you had some sort of Xenoblade Chronicles in Vanguard? Xenoblade Chronicles is a JRPG that came out on June 10th, 2010 in Japan. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, we didn't get it until 2011. The only reason we even managed to get it in the first place was thanks to Operation Rainfall, which was a fan-led campaign in order to get a group of JRPGs localized on the rest of the world. Thankfully, Xenoblade Chronicles was one of these, which led to it being a huge hit. It led to Shulk getting to Smash, and then us eventually getting an HD edition on the Switch, which is the best way to play the game now. Don't play the DS version unless you really don't have any other choice. While Different Fight originally meant a Xenoblade Chronicles-like archetype in Vanguard, as in humans using futuristic weapons and whatnot, I think a full-on collab set would actually be really cool and really doable in something like Overdress. Let me explain a little bit more about Xenoblade Chronicles, and I'll tell you why I think that. Xenoblade Chronicles centers around the Mechanis and the Bionis. These are giant beings that have been at war for many, many years. Eventually, these huge chonkers actually develop living beings on them, and then regretfully, these living beings continue the war amongst themselves. Our story starts out here with Shulk in his hometown, better known as Colony 9, where it's actually being attacked by the Mechon, which are residents from the Mechanis that we discussed earlier. Unfortunately, for the citizens of Colony 9, there's no way that any of their weapons can actually damage the Mechon. They're actually robotic living beings. However, there is one weapon that can actually destroy these things, called the Monado. Unfortunately, not just anyone can wield the Monado. In fact, the previous user was actually injured by it and can no longer wield it. But thankfully, Shulk can, and he just manages to use it and ward off the Mechon and cause them to retreat. This becomes a catalyst for Shulk and his friend Ryan to go set out on a journey to kill all the Mechon. I won't talk more about the story from here, but I'll give you a sort of cliff notes. Afterwards, we meet Charla, a medic who uses a magic gun. We later get to meet Dunban, who was the hero that previously wielded the Monado. Melia, who is a magic bird person who casts magic for birds. And Ricky, who's a ball of that, and he does funny things. So why exactly do I think a collab with Vanguard and Xenoblade Chronicles would be really cool? Well, aside from the fact that I love both Vanguard and Xenoblade Chronicles, one of the main reasons is that we don't really have any sort of human sort of ride line in Overdress at the moment. The closest we have is everything we have in Keter Sanctuary, but that's just, these brolic dudes in armor, or these magical girls, which is, fine, but we don't have any actual normal humans, just walking around with we don't have anime dudes and girls walking around with swords and whatnot. The closest we have to that is, the Baromagus line in Dark States, but they're more like X-Men. I was doing this, but Spider-Man's not an X-Men, so I just think it'd be really cool to have some sort of anime swords, man, woman, archetype or ride line in Overdress. And it's just kind of weird that we don't already have that, considering that it already has an anime, but in any case. The gameplay for Xenoblade Chronicles is somewhat standard for JRPGs. You have a set of party members, each fulfilling their own different roles. You can equip armor and weapons to them, and you go out and you fight battles. But there's a lot of things that sets it apart. For example, they have a sort of action battle type of system. It's not a turn-based RPG, it's more like an MMORPG, where your characters have an auto attack that they're constantly attacking enemies with, and they also have skills that refresh on a cooldown timer. You can also then use these skills along with your party member's skill in order to combine them and actually get some interesting results. For example, it's kind of like when you want to pull a prank on someone and you want to like trip them, so you do that thing where you tell them to come to a specific location, and then you push them, and then your other friend, they go behind them and they do like the little table thing, so then they fall, and then you and your other friends kind of like kick the shit out of them. That's basically what happens in Xenoblade Chronicles. Since a lot of the enemies that you fight are actually these big, giant, towering behemoths, you actually have to combine your moves in order to literally knock them down and, you know, beat them senseless. So essentially, you work with your 3 party members to coordinate your attacks and take down your foes. You can only have 3 party members at a time, so it's actually very similar to Vanguard in that regard. Each of your party members also has their own roles to fulfill. For example, Ryan is your tank who takes on damage and also draws enemy fire to him. Charla is your medic who can actually heal you from long range because she has a freaking gun. Dunban is like your high agility attacker, and then Melia actually can buff your party and then throw out really huge, powerful, magical attacks. And then Ricky, he's like a bard because he applies status effects, but he also has the most HP, so he's kind of like a tank. But he's also like a thief because he can like steal stuff? What the fuck even is Ricky? So if Vanguard were to have some sort of collab with Xenoblade, you'd have to find a way to translate the mechanics from the game into the card game, which I think are actually really simple. Let me show you how. So I was originally thinking for this, maybe we could just only have one ride line that focuses on Shulk. Aside from him being the protagonist and the game obviously being centered around him, the gameplay also focuses around him because you actually need Shulk to actually enable most of your party members. The reason for that is that he has the Monado, which has the Monado arts that actually allow his teammates to sometimes even be able to do any damage to any of his opponents. And this happens more often than not. Most of the times you can not even do any damage to an enemy unless Shulk goes over in the corner and yells at his sword for a little bit. But yeah, so I was just thinking we could just easily have a ride line for each of the main characters. So you got Shulk, Rhine, Charla, Dunban, Melia, and Ricky. Sorry, other character that I can't name because of spoilers. And so each of those ride lines, and by extension each of those decks and playstyles, would sort of take on the same sort of characteristics and traits that their main boss unit portrays in the actual game. However, while at the same time, you can use these interchangeably since they're supposed to be working as a big team, right? So let me go over Shulk first. For Shulk, you have to have him focus on the Monado and his Monado arts. Originally, I was trying to go a sort of route where you kind of have multiple different grade 3 versions of Shulk, each of them tied to each Monado art, and you would kind of like persona ride into each one. They'd share the same name, so you'd be able to persona ride each time, and then an effect would apply. But that kind of thinking was, you know, miscrewed by what's going on in Smash, where that's kind of how Shulk works, where he uses the Monado arts for himself. And that's because he's the only one that's actually there in that game. Whereas in the game, that's not really how the Monado arts work. He can use the Monado arts on himself, on one of his party members, his entire party, and even on the enemy that he's fighting. So instead of having multiple Shulks, you just have the one sort of Shulk as part of the main ride line, and instead of having the arts be multiple Shulks, there would have to be set orders. But set orders and orders in general are kind of clunky, so I was thinking we could do something like this. So you'll have your grade 0 Shulk, it will just let you draw for going second. You'll go into your grade 1 Shulk, where if you ride over the grade 0 Shulk, you can actually add a set order with a specific name on it from your deck to hand. Then you go into your grade 2 Shulk, which lets you add an order from your drop into your soul, and if you ride over the grade 1 Shulk with the grade 2, you can add another set order from your deck into your soul. Finally, we have the grade 3 Shulk. I was thinking something around the lines of these 3 skills. Once per turn, you can select one Monado art set order and place it in your order zone. Once per turn, if one of your units were to be attacked, or if it were to be retired by one of your opponent's cards effect, you can play a set order Monado art from your soul in your order zone. Shuffle that order back into your deck at the end of that turn. When this unit attacks, if the target it is attacking is already inflicted with break and topple, give this unit 1 critical, 10,000 power. Then, if the attack hits, inflicted with daze. So let me explain all of that really quickly. The first skill is to try and mimic Shulk's Monado arts. Monado arts are skills that Shulk can do in battle in order to change the tide in his favor. There's multiple of them and you can use a variety of them depending on the right situation. You get these by building up a gauge in game, which is why you can only use it when you're on grade 3. There are 8 different arts that you can use, each having different effects. So depending on the opponent that you're facing or the situation that you're in, you can choose to play the corresponding art that will get you out of that situation or ideally put you in a beneficial one. And you know, the ride line naturally gives you 2 orders that you can play, as well as you can have other cards that'll get you other orders from your hand or deck or drop or whatever into the soul. The reason you're playing it directly from the soul is that I think that would be a lot easier and less cumbersome than having to get cards into hand and then play them, and you can only play them once per turn, and you can't guard with them. So it's just an easier way to just be able to have the resource without it actually applying anything sort of broken, because you can only use them once per turn and you only apply once per turn. And you can still only use one once per turn. So I was thinking they could all be grade 3 orders. The grade doesn't really matter, but they'll be grade 3 set orders, and they'll all have this next block of text in all of them. This card can only play from your soul by your Vanguard ability. At the end of your turn, return this face-up card in your order zone back into your soul. You can only have 1 copy of this card in your deck, and they each have their own specific ability that they apply. For example, the first one, Monado Art Buster. In the game, this lets you do massive damage to a specific type of enemy. Here, we'll kind of go similar to how in Smash Brothers and just give it a giant power buff. Very simply, whenever your rear guard attacks, it gets 20k power. Then the next one here, Monado Art Enchant, is actually used to enable your entire party to actually be able to attack a specific type of enemy. So, it'll just basically be a continuous skill applied to your Vanguard, where when one of your rear guards attack a Vanguard, they get an additional 10,000 power. Then we have the other 2 Monado arts here, which are more closely tied to the second skill that I mentioned. For example, Monado Art Shield here will give all your units, if they don't already have it, resist for 2 turns. And there's also Monado Art Speed, which allows you to select one of your units, give them 15k power, but they can't declare an attack this turn. Monado Shield and Monado Speed are used in battle in order to protect your teammates. Shield applies to all of your party members and allows them to not get trashed by the enemy's special skills, and Speed just raises the evasion for one of your party members. There's 4 more, but I won't go over them in detail. 1, because the other ones you kind of already know from Smash, and 2, the other ones are sort of deeper in the game, and I wouldn't really count on a spoiler, but I'll just avoid it altogether. Shulk's second skill revolves around the Monado's other ability, which allows him to see the future. When you're in game and you're fighting an enemy, you'll actually have a vision of the future. This vision is always going to be one of your party members literally dying. What happens here is, after you see this vision, you actually get a chance to change the future. You can either heal this party member so they can survive the hit, you can apply a buff to them, or you can kill the enemy that's trying to kill them, which I always thought was really cool. Originally, I was thinking of doing something where, like, once per turn, if you're getting attacked, you can, like, reveal the top card of your deck, and if it has a guard, you know, you can add that to your guard, but I was like, well, no, let's just use the Monado arts. So, basically what you could do with this is, if once per turn, one of your units is either going to get retired, let's say by Gravidia's Meteors, or if you're about to get smacked with 60k column with 2 crits on it, you can go ahead and use either Monado Shield or Speed there and try and save yourself or your board. I was trying to find a good way to balance this, which is why I made the order go back into the deck and get shuffled at the end of that turn, so you can't just keep spamming that out. You already can't use it multiple times in one turn, but you won't be able to use it constantly. I don't know if that's a huge thing, considering Buff Saga can very easily kind of do the same thing and just block with 10k on the Vanguard. So it's more or less the same thing, but I don't know. And finally, we have Shulk's last skill here. This is probably the most confusing one, but basically, as I was mentioning before with the situation where you prank one of your friends, that's kind of what happens in the game. You have these certain abilities. One of them is Break, which, you know, multiple of your skills can do that, and they inflict Break on one of the opponents or all of the opponents, which basically just roughly lowers their defenses, but it also sort of weakens their legs, let's say. Then you can have another party member, or sometimes even the same party member, come in, and while they're still inflicted with break, you can have them come in with topple, which will essentially, as it sounds like, topple down that opponent, make them fall flat on their ass. Then you can have a third, or again the same party member, come in and use another skill that has daze on it, which literally dazes them and makes it so that they stay on their stomach or their back longer, and also makes it so that their defenses go even lower. And essentially I wanted to try and use this as a sort of way for you to be able to do that same sort of coordination in Vanguard, where you can coordinate your attacks no matter which units you have. So you can have your Shulk, your Rhine, and your Dunban, or you can have your Sharla, your Ricky, and your Melia, whatever the case may be. They'll all have that skill, one of those effects that they can apply to one of your opponent's units. I say units, but it's really only going to be to the Vanguard, because if you apply it to a rear guard, it's not going to work out, because these attacks have to hit. That's sort of the way that I try to balance them. So if you do hit all three of them, then your opponent is a really tough spot. But they sort of work in order. You can't topple someone if they don't have break already. You can't apply daze if they don't have topple, and likewise you can't apply topple if they don't have break. You can very easily just guard the break attack, and then the other effects you don't really have to worry about. So in Vanguard, to sort of translate them, it was kind of tricky. Break would be something like when the attack hits, lower that unit's attack by like 5 or 3 or something like that. Then topple is the one that was kind of difficult. I was thinking sort of like what Mega Colony does, where the unit wouldn't be able to stand, but I didn't want it to be a little bit too overbearing. So it's basically, if you're hit with topple, you can't stand on the next stand phase, but you can discard the top card of your deck in order to be able to stand that unit. So instead of having to discard a card, it's a little easier cost to just dip the top card of your deck. And then finally, daze is somewhat powerful, but at the same time, it's kind of like a win more move, where if you hit your opponent and they're inflicted with daze, any of your future attacks, your opponent would have to then guard with 2 or more cards, in addition to having to discard a card, since more often than not, you're going to go through your 3 attacks and you might not be able to follow up on them. I think I blabbed on about Xenoblade Chronicles long enough. Let me just go over a few more sort of boss units and their playstyles, and then I'll just be on my way. So I was thinking with Rhine, who's obviously the tank of your team, and he's a lot more defensive, that you can have some sort of skill where you can like counterblast 2 or like counterblast 1, soul blast 1, whatever the case may be. And so it applies an effect on your opponent's turn where the Rhine Vanguard actually gets 10k power during your opponent's turn. And if your opponent manages to land an attack on Rhine on your following turn, Rhine actually gets like a critical or 10k power or something like that. Something to sort of embody his playstyle of sort of being really tanky and then warding off attacks onto him instead. Charlotte is a little bit difficult because she is a medic, so she's not very offensive, so having her as a Vanguard would be a little bit difficult. So she'd have a sort of like Angel Feather sort of playstyle where she can like maybe heal 1 damage at like the cost of a bunch of Soul Blasts, which in the game they do have a sort of like mana system. So instead of using mana, you can use Soul, which I think is a pretty, easy analogy there. So it'll be sort of a soul charging focused deck where you would have to maybe soul charge a specific unit or a specific order. Like, let's say her bullets are in order, you have to soul charge those out. And then maybe at the end of the turn you can get them back, because she has this really weird thing where she has this, like, she has her, giant, like, sniper gun thing, but then it, like, heats up for some reason. It just gets really hot and you have to, like, literally cool it off before she can do anything. So that can sort of be like that, where you, like, heal, and then it gets too hot, so you dump all the Soul Blasts and pay the mana costs. And then once you cool off, you get to put maybe some of those bullets back or something like that. I don't know. And then in addition to that, since she focuses on healing, you can have a very similar skill to what Shulk does and sort of what Bob Sagar does, where if one of your units is being attacked, you can go ahead and shoot one of her heal bullets to that unit, and they'll get 10k until the end of that battle, or something like that. And finally, Melia is sort of a really interesting one. So in the game, she summons these like spirits, these elemental spirits that all have different elements, and they each apply different buffs to your party, so they'll heal them, they'll increase their attack or something like that, and so you can summon multiple of them, and those, effects would stack depending on how many of them you have. And then in order for her to actually attack, she actually just grabs those spirits and then, throws it into the enemy's face, which is really cool. So I was thinking she could be sort of something that like summons these tokens as your elementals, and they each have their kind of effect that stacks depending on how many of them that you have. And then once Melia herself actually attacks, you can like retire all of your elementals that are on the field, and she gets like a crit or like extra drive or something like that. That's it. I just think, combining Xenoblade and Vanguard would be amazing. Not just because I love both Vanguard and Xenoblade, I just think it'll be really fun to see the art drawn by Vanguard artists. I think it'd be really cool to see the playstyles sort of merge over. And it doesn't even have to be anything that I discussed here. I think it would just be cool to see what they could come up with. But I think that'll do it for me today. If you thought this was interesting, or you have any thoughts, maybe Shulk's too strong, Ryan's too weak, or maybe this was just dumb in general, let me know in the comments down below. I was kind of hesitant to do this in the first place because I don't know how this will be received, but I decided to just give it a shot anyways. But in any case, till next time, take care of yourself.